James Simpson is an autistic sound engineer who manages complex PTSD through a highly regimented creative process. His workspace is centered around a vinyl cutter, a tool he uses to maintain focus and regulate his sensory environment. When Simpson believed he had uncovered evidence of corruption within local law enforcement, he initiated a formal whistleblowing process. He submitted protected disclosures to the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, relying on the specific legal frameworks designed to protect citizens from retaliation. The documents show that Simpson's faith in these whistleblower protections served as the catalyst for what would become a coordinated multi-agency operation against him. On October 18, 2024, members of the Victoria Police executed a search warrant on Simpson's home in Seaford. Officers focused their seizure on Simpson's documented therapeutic equipment, his vinyl cutter and heat press. Despite taking nearly 40 items, the police did not provide a Form 74 seizure receipt at the scene, effectively removing the property from the legal chain of custody. In audio recorded during the raid, officers are heard discussing the use of untested legislation to justify the operation. This targeted removal of Simpson's primary coping mechanisms, coupled with the bypass of standard receipting protocols, indicates an operation designed to dismantle his immediate support structure rather than collect standard criminal evidence. 3 days after the raid, Simpson confronted Detective Ryan Hopkins. He warned the officer that his conduct mirrored the abuses seen in the Carrick case, an investigation involving the mistreatment of an autistic minor. Hopkins responded by charging Simpson with stalking. Though the charge was filed after their confrontation, Hopkins backdated the start of the alleged offending to October 21st, the exact date of the warning. While Simpson was offshore in May 2025, Services Australia abruptly cancelled his disability support pension. The move left a vulnerable citizen stranded in a foreign country without financial means. Exactly 24 hours after Simpson returned to Australia and was taken into custody, the agency manually reinstated the pension. This reinstatement included an $8,393 back pay deposit, an action used by law enforcement to confirm and ping his current physical location. The synchronized timing between the welfare system and criminal investigators suggests a unified administrative effort to facilitate his arrest. Simpson was arrested on September 10, 2025. He was detained at Hastings Police Station for 6 hours without access to his required medication or water. During the interrogation, Simpson entered a state of psychomotor retardation. He is recorded telling officers his mental health is too far gone and that he cannot keep his eyes open, signaling a total physiological collapse. The independent third person assigned to protect Simpson, Mike Bennett, was captured on a hot mic whispering to the suspect. He was heard attempting to coordinate a specific narrative for Simpson to provide to the police. When Simpson attempted to exercise his right to remain silent, Bennett intervened. He told the officers that he believed Simpson understood the caution, effectively overriding the suspect's no comment and allowing the interrogation to continue. The safeguards meant to protect a disabled person during questioning were used to provide a veneer of legal consent for a suspect in medical distress. The Commonwealth's prosecution rests on a set of charges that contain a verifiable geographical impossibility. The charge sheet alleges that Simpson committed federal crimes between June 2nd and June 17th, 2025. However, the document itself notes that the suspect was offshore in a foreign country during this period, placing him outside the jurisdiction of the investigating agencies. Forensic analysis of the September 10th interrogation audio reveals a series of technical anomalies. The record shows a 21-minute gap alongside triplicate audio loops. Furthermore, the evidence directory contains an adobe.pkf edit file. This file extension generates automatically when audio is opened in a digital workstation, indicating post-production editing. The combination of geographic impossibility and processed audio files removes the legal foundation for the prosecution's evidence. Detective Pham's internal running sheets provide the final contradiction. He noted that Simpson was calm and was actively taking steps to avoid illegal online content. The Australian Federal Police's own situation report contains an even more significant admission. The arresting unit's internal summary states clearly that the Security Investigations Unit did not feel like Simpson was a threat at all. The state's internal data reveals a prosecution that contradicts its own findings. This high-level coordination against a whistleblower indicates a system functioning as a tool for reprisal rather than an instrument of justice.
All right, let's dive into something uniquely Australian. We're going to follow this really specific kind of gritty thread that runs through the country's story. It's all about a raw, aggressive, and often sexualized use of language. And believe it or not, it connects a 19th century colonial hero to the super technical rap verses of today. So let's trace this line of Australian filth from the dusty outback right into a modern recording studio. So we're kicking things off right here in the now with this lyrical persona called the Roo Digger. And you gotta get this. This isn't just about making music. As the quote says, it's a weapon, a high-tensile forensic instrument. It's been built from the ground up for a very specific and very confrontational job. So how exactly does this weapon work? Let's pop the hood on what's called the Roo Digger engine. The whole idea is to take the dry, bureaucratic language of the government and turn it right back on itself, but with military-grade precision. Now, this is not just some random angry ranting. It's a persona that has been meticulously built. The logic? It's all based on specific legal documents, like Exhibit MPS 02. The tone is pure industrial grime. Think raw, mechanical, in-your-face aggression. Even the rhymes themselves are designed to be crazy dense. This is a totally calculated assault. The level of technical skill here is just staggering. I mean, think about it for a second. A no-repeat rule within an 8-bar block? That means you need an absolutely massive vocabulary. And those dense, multi-syllable rhymes, they aren't just there to sound smart. They're cramming complex legal ideas into this relentless rhythm. The whole thing is almost mathematical. It's wild. And here's the final piece of the puzzle for this modern persona, the language itself. We're talking pure strain. This is no generic rap accent. It's deliberately and totally unapologetically Australian. It uses specific slang words with real precision, all to ground this forensic attack in a very local, very real identity. But look, this super specific aggressive character doesn't just exist in a vacuum, right? It's actually part of a much bigger conversation, the long search for a truly unique voice in Australian hip-hop. Oh, I just love this quote from the artist Dialectrics, a mongrel mutation. It just perfectly nails how Aussie hip-hop isn't a carbon copy of its American roots. Nope, it's a hybrid, something new that's been forged out of local accents, unique slang, and the real-life experiences of a super multicultural society. This right here is a perfect example of that language reclamation. Bullymen. It's a term from Aboriginal English for the police. It's so simple, so concise, but man, is it powerful. And just one word, it flips the whole relationship with authority from one of protection to one of persecution. It packs an entire history of conflict into a single word. So this all brings up a really big question. Where did this whole tradition of using aggressive, in-your-face language to build a national identity even start? Well, the roots go back a lot farther than you probably think. Okay, let's jump in a time machine. The year is 1889. That guy you see in the center, all armed and looking confident, that is Mounted Constable William Wilshire. And he is the other half of our story. He's the original architect of a very different, but you know what? An equally powerful Australian narrative. Now, Wilshire wasn't just some policeman out in the bush. He was the living, breathing embodiment of a foundational Australian myth, the heroic pioneer bushman. See, before Australia was even officially a single country, this character was being built up in books and art. The bushman was the guy who tamed the wild landscape. He was the symbol of a new, rugged, and, let's be real, a distinctly white Australian identity. He was basically the superhero in the country's origin story. And boom, here's where our two worlds just slam into each other. You've got the modern Rudiger using rap bars to tear a narrative down, and you've got the historical bushman using prose to build one up. Both of them using language as a weapon. So look at them, side by side. Their goals were complete opposites, right? One wants to dismantle the state, the other wants to build the nation. But their tool? It was exactly the same, language, crafted very carefully. Rudiger's got his forensic lyricism, Wilshire had his romantic, self-promoting stories. And you have to give it to him, Wilshire was a master of his own PR. I mean, this guy was basically building his personal brand in the 1800s. Through his books, his public statements, even staged photos like the one we saw, he was meticulously creating this image of the great adventurer. He wasn't just living the life, he was writing the legend as he went. But this is where the connection between these two worlds gets a lot darker. This is where the filth from our title really comes into play. Because simmering just underneath both the modern aggression and the colonial romance is this deep and frankly pretty troubling current of sex and power. Okay, remember that modern style we talked about? Industrial grime, that raw, confrontational, almost brutal sound. Got it? Okay, just hold that thought in your head for a second. Because here is its colonial era echo, black velvet. It was slang for sexual relationships between white men and Aboriginal women. It's a term that basically frames these women as a forbidden, exotic product. It's just dripping with objectification. So you go from industrial grime to black velvet. The words change, but that aggressive undercurrent of power and control, it's exactly the same. And this right here is the absolute core contradiction of our man, MC Wilshire. Publicly, he was a hyper-aggressive critic of relationships between white men and Aboriginal women. He was dead set against it. But his private writing, his journals, and his fiction, well, they tell a very, very different story. Yeah, these are Wilshire's own words. The language is so possessive, so voyeuristic. It paints this incredibly clear picture of his own obsession. And notice how he projects his own desire onto them. He frames it as their delight in the forbidden, which conveniently puts him at the center of the story as the guy breaking the taboo.
And let's be clear, his most famous book wasn't just some boy's own adventure story. It's been described as this bizarre, unsettling mix of ethnography and, get this, voyeuristic sexualized soft porn. He was literally using the national myth that he helped create as a cover for his own private obsessions.
So that's where we land. From the eroticized private diaries of a colonial mythmaker to the forensic public bars of a modern rapper, this aggressive, often grimy, and intensely personal use of language has been this strange constant. So the big question is, what does that tell us about the hidden wiring of Australian identity? And what does it reveal about the stories the country continues to tell itself about power, race, and what is and isn't the truth?
Imagine investigators finally locate a massive cache of stolen goods, prying open the crates in the dead of night. But there's a fatal procedural flaw. The search warrant they relied on was never formally sworn. Courts are immediately forced to balance two conflicting imperatives. There is an obvious public interest in convicting people who break the law, but there is an equally vital interest in deterring police officers from breaking the rules to catch them. In the United States, the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine dictates that evidence found through an illegal search is automatically excluded. Australian law rejects that absolute approach. Instead, Australian courts rely on Section 138 of the Uniform Evidence Acts. This statute establishes a strict mechanism to conditionally admit flawed evidence, rather than instantly throwing it out. Drawing on analysis from Foley's list, we can map exactly how this legal test operates. The framework prioritizes the structural integrity of the administration of justice over individual fairness or the punishment of the accused. Section 138 functions as a structural defense. The court's primary concern is preventing the judicial system from becoming a tacit endorser of investigative misconduct. The statute operates as a two-stage pipeline. In Stage 1, the applicant, usually the defense, must prove on the balance of probabilities that the evidence was obtained illegally or improperly. Impriority carries a specific threshold. Based on the Ridgway standard, investigators must have engaged in conduct clearly inconsistent with minimum societal standards. Minor procedural blurring fails to meet this trigger. Once the defense establishes that illegality or severe impropriety occurred, the burden of proof physically shifts across the courtroom. It is now entirely up to the prosecution to justify why the evidence should be allowed in. To meet that burden, the prosecution must navigate the Section 138-3 matrix. This is a mandatory filter requiring the judge to weigh 8 interconnected factors, ranging from the gravity of the offense to the difficulty of obtaining the evidence legally. Because of this structure, prosecutors routinely watch highly incriminating, perfectly reliable evidence get excluded. If they cannot mathematically justify its passage through these 8 specific factors, the critical evidence is legally erased. The most critical variable is the precise mental state of the investigating officer. We plot this on the x-axis, tracking a spectrum from simple carelessness to recklessness and deliberate defiance. We plot the objective gravity of the impropriety on the y-axis. The interaction between these axes was tested in DPP v. Mariancevic, a case involving a major drug manufacturing investigation and a series of police search warrants. Police executed those warrants and found substantial evidence, but the affidavits used to secure the warrants were signed in front of an inspector, not actually sworn under oath as required by the Drugs, Poisons, and Controlled Substances Act. The Court of Appeal had to determine where the officers' actions fell on the x-axis, drawing a hard line between mere carelessness and actual recklessness. An officer is reckless if they recognize their conduct might be illegal, but proceed with a don't-care attitude anyway. Once a judge determines an investigator acted recklessly or deliberately, admitting their evidence becomes almost impossible. Admitting it would grant curial approval to intentional lawlessness, damaging the court's integrity. The gravity of police conduct is also shaped by human rights, as seen in DPP v. Caba. Here, a routine random traffic check escalated when police repeatedly demanded a passenger's name without suspicion, eventually arresting him for offensive language. The court found that police breached the passenger's rights to privacy and freedom of movement under the Victorian Charter of Human Rights. Under Section 138, violating a charter right directly constitutes a contravention of an Australian law, triggering the exclusionary pipeline. But proving the police broke the law is only half the battle. In Slater v. the Queen, the court examined the required causal link between the illegal act and the evidence actually recovered. The defense must prove the evidence was obtained in consequence of the illegality. If the chain of events linking the bad police conduct to the discovered evidence stretches too far, the connection becomes tenuous.
For example, if an illegal search yields a minor clue, and investigators subsequently obtain a fully legal warrant based on independent factors to find the actual contraband, the causal chain has been stretched. As that causal connection becomes more tenuous, the court's calculus shifts. The public interest in deterring the initial police misconduct is severely diluted when the critical evidence is ultimately secured through lawful intervening steps. The tension between the value of the evidence and the severity of the misconduct reached the High Court in Kadir v. the Queen. This case centered on unauthorized covert surveillance conducted by activists to expose animal cruelty. A photographer repeatedly trespassed on a greyhound training facility, secretly recording video footage of severe cruelty. The footage was highly incriminating, but obtaining it clearly violated the Surveillance Devices Act. This triggered Factor A of the Section 138 matrix, the probative value of the evidence. To assess this, the court applies the IMM test. Under IMM, the judge must take the evidence at its absolute highest. At this stage, they cannot downgrade its value by questioning the credibility or reliability of the person who filmed it. The footage showed exactly what it showed. But Factor A collided directly with Factor H, the difficulty of obtaining the evidence without impropriety. The lower courts assumed that because it would be extremely difficult to secure a lawful surveillance warrant based purely on an anonymous tip, the illegal footage should be admitted to ensure a conviction. The High Court of Australia stepped in and completely inverted that logic. The justices ruled that when impropriety is deliberate or reckless, the fact that lawful evidence gathering would have been difficult actually weighs against admission. It is not an excuse for breaking the law. No matter how undeniably probative a video was, its value could not salvage the deliberate illegality. Bypassing lawful avenues simply because they are difficult is precisely the behavior the statute is built to deter. Applying Section 138 is a discretionary balancing exercise, and when a trial judge makes that calculation, appellate courts review it under the strict House v. King standard. Under this standard, appellate judges apply extreme deference to the trial court's decision. They will not overturn a ruling just because they might have balanced the factors differently. A reversal requires proof of a specific identifiable legal error. This makes the trial record your most critical asset. You must capture the specific Section 138 factors verbally during the hearing. This means forcing the court reporter to physically transcribe sidebar arguments and chambers discussions. If a judge refuses to allow the reporter in, you must state your objections on the open record immediately after. Furthermore, the Evidence Act requires explicit offers of proof. If the judge sustains an objection blocking your evidence, you must tell the court exactly what the witness or document would have shown and its relevance to the Section 138 matrix. The reality of appellate law is harsh.
If the specific statutory grounds and the excluded evidence aren't captured on the transcript, the appellate court assumes they do not exist. When cross-examining an investigator during a Section 138 hearing, the primary objective isn't just proving they made a mistake, it is pinning down their specific attitude toward the rule of law at the moment the evidence was gathered. You cannot rely on generic objections. Throwing out a broad claim of unfairness waives your appellate rights. You must cite the precise statutory factor you are challenging, like Factor E, recklessness, or Factor D, gravity of the contravention. Following a bench trial, the loser is entitled to a statement of decision detailing the factual and legal basis for the ruling. It is essential to ensure the judge explicitly documents the officer's mental state in that official statement. If the court rules against you, you need the document to explicitly classify the conduct as careless, reckless, or deliberate to give your appellate lawyer a target. A successful Section 138 application depends on the mathematical proof of investigatory culpability, cemented permanently into the trial record, alongside the specific breach of rights.
Let's get right into this. We're looking at the story of one man, Philip James Simpson, but through two completely different, totally opposing lenses. On one hand, you've got the official story from the state, and on the other, you have a detailed counter-narrative laid out in a massive dossier.
And this is really the heart of the matter. Is he a dangerous extremist, or is he the target of a huge government plot? You see, the same set of facts, the very same events, have been used to build two stories that couldn't be more different. So in this explainer, we're going to break down both of them, piece by piece, so you can see for yourself how these two realities were constructed. First up, let's examine the case that's being presented by the authorities. This is the profile that really forms the entire basis of the serious charges Philip Simpson is facing right now.
This number? Wow. This is really the foundation of the state's case against him. According to their records, Philip Simpson has faced over 140 charges in Queensland alone. And this isn't recent stuff. His criminal history goes all the way back to the year 2000, including convictions for things like public nuisance, drug possession, and assault.
And that long history brings us to today. He's now the main target of a joint operation between the Australian Federal Police and Victoria Police. And he's facing these incredibly serious federal and state charges, which have really ramped up the official view of him from, just a repeat offender to a genuine national concern.
And this is the label they've put on him. When you combine that really long criminal history with what he's being charged with now, the official story becomes crystal clear. Philip Simpson is a far-right extremist, and he's a threat to public safety.
Okay, now let's completely flip the script and see how a totally different picture gets painted. We're going to dive into the counter-narrative, which basically argues that if you want to understand the man, you first have to look at his life through the lens of trauma and disability.
This slide, this is really the core of the dossier's whole argument. It gives us this clinical profile of a 40-year-old diagnosed with level 3 autism and severe CPTSD. And the dossier directly connects these conditions to a life of unbelievable trauma. We're talking childhood abuse and a family life just shattered by alcoholism and tragedy, including his own father's suicide.
So here's the million-dollar question. If he's not an extremist, then how on earth does the dossier explain the very actions that led to him being charged in the first place? This is where the story shifts from a man's troubled past to his alleged intent.
Well, the dossier claims his online personas are actually satirical. They're described as just characters for an 18-plus comedy channel, and they've got sworn affidavits to back this up. The dossier even includes his own words to police where he says, and I quote, "Everything I do is of comedic purposes. I state that I always do comedy."
Now this slide right here perfectly captures the heart of this whole conflict. It's fascinating. The state sees a prohibited Nazi salute, a clear, undeniable symbol of extremism. But the dossier reframes that exact same physical action as a medically based behavior. They say it's either an involuntary motor pattern tied to his autism or what he himself calls a biblical gesture.
So if it's not about some political revolution, what's his endgame? Well, according to the dossier, it has nothing to do with attacking the state, it's about escaping it. His stated goal is to get what he calls medical exile.
Now we get to what is, without a doubt, the most explosive claim in the entire counter-narrative. The dossier doesn't just say the state misinterpreted his actions, it alleges that they deliberately set him up to ensure he'd be arrested.
The dossier uses a very specific term for this alleged plot, a honeypot scheme.
So what's that? Well, the theory is that the authorities used something he desperately needed, his disability support pension, as bait to lure him back into the country and into a spot where they could easily arrest him.
And this timeline is supposedly the proof. It alleges that while Simpson was out of the country, his pension was suspended for a bogus reason. Starved for cash, he had to come back to Australia. Then, his protected address was allegedly leaked illegally to the police, which led directly to his arrest. And here's the real kicker, according to the dossier. His pension was granted, and all his back pay was released just 24 hours after he was in custody.
This is the amount, over $8,000 in pension arrears. The dossier claims this wasn't just a welfare payment, it was the bait. It was held back until his location was confirmed and the arrest was made, and then it was released the second the trap was sprung.
And that brings us full circle. We've seen the evidence presented from two totally opposing viewpoints, so let's put their final conclusions right next to each other.
For the state, the conclusion is pretty straightforward. They see a clear pattern of behavior. They see a man with a long, documented criminal past, whose current actions, advocating violence, displaying prohibited symbols, define him as a far-right extremist who poses a serious risk to everyone.
The dossier, on the other hand, offers a verdict that could not be more different. It concludes he is not a terrorist, but a profoundly disabled and traumatized man. It argues his actions aren't crimes of ideology, but are actually provoked disability responses, and that he himself is the victim of a coordinated, illegal entrapment scheme.
Ultimately, the case of Phillip Simpson leaves us with a really difficult question. No matter what you think of the man himself, his story forces us to look at the methods used in modern policing. It asks us all to think about where we draw the line between preventing a crime and actually creating the conditions for one to happen.
Now, a 41-year-old man sits in the crosshairs of Operation Avalite Isle, a massive task force run by the Australian Federal and Victoria Police. When you look at the organizational chart of Operation Avalite Isle, you see a massive intelligence apparatus funneling down to target a single individual. While state agencies classify this target as a dangerous extremist, his clinical and forensic records tell a very different story. The target is Phillip James Simpson, a 41-year-old seventh-generation Irish-Australian man. To understand the person at the center of this operation, we have to look past the tactical deer and focus on the childhood events that the state's reporting overlooks. Phillip grew up in a highly volatile environment. His father, an alcoholic, subjected the family to extreme domestic violence before completing suicide in 2019. His mother also struggled with addiction, and in 2009, Phillip lost his brother to sarcoma. Surviving this environment left a specific clinical footprint. He was eventually diagnosed with level 3 autism and CPTSD. Instead of offering psychiatric intervention or a disability safety net, the state intercepted him through the justice system. He accumulated over 140 charges in Queensland, primarily for public nuisance and drug possession, resulting in 7 separate custodial sentences. Without medical support, Phillip was forced to develop his own unconventional methods to survive his trauma and his neurodivergence. Phillip eventually attempted to stabilize his life outside the conventional medical system. He relied on prescribed medical marijuana for symptom management and operated a small shirt printing business to support himself. He also found a creative outlet, creating Philfy, an abrasive, highly exaggerated alter ego for an 18-plus comedy channel. Using a green screen, he began broadcasting satirical content. Under this persona, he released an underground rap track titled Anti-AFP Rap, which used aggressive lyricism to call out documented issues like missing body cam footage and evidence planting. Those close to him understood the context of his work. Sworn community affidavits confirm that his online channel was recognized as performance art and comedy, rather than a political manifesto. Philfy acted as a protective shield, allowing a vulnerable man to broadcast strength and critique the system that had marginalized him. Despite the satirical nature of his videos, state intelligence chose to read his content literally. They stripped away the creative context to build a profile of a radicalized extremist. This resulted in a chilling clinical mischaracterization. Surveillance analysts took his involuntary autistic motor tics and idiosyncratic gestures and classified them as deliberate Nazi salutes. The federal response was an immediate escalation. During a massive raid, the AFP and NDIA seized his business printing press and his medical marijuana, reportedly failing to issue the required receipts for the property. By removing his only means of income and his primary medication, the authorities triggered a severe psychological breakdown. When Phillip reacted to the loss of his stabilizing tools, the police arrested him, charging his reactive distress as stalking and intimidation. This sequence, identifying a disabled and stabilizing tools, removing them, and then charging the resulting psychological collapse, became the foundation of the state's case. The state's dossier describes a man determined to engage in anti-government violence. The evidence of his actual life points elsewhere. Phillip's documented goal is to achieve what he calls medical exile in Da Nang, Vietnam, removing himself from the Australian legal and surveillance system entirely. Surveillance of Operation Avalite Isle is currently focused on a man whose only stated ambition is to leave the country and peacefully. Data shows a coordinated effort between Services Australia, the NDIA, and the AFP. These agencies shared private data to build a narrative against a single citizen. This coordination extended to his financial survival, with his disability pension monitored to trap and arrest him. The federal government has dedicated a massive amount of resources to dismantling the life of a single traumatized individual. The legacy of Phillip Simpson suggests that the federal machine's greatest success wasn't neutralizing a threat, but demonstrating its own willingness to dismantle a vulnerable life to justify its expansion. These severe clinical realities require strict legal protections and specific reasonable adjustments during any interaction with the state. Simpson's case involves 7 distinct government agencies. This overlap indicates a coordinated operation against a protected whistleblower, utilizing the simultaneous application of welfare, border, and policing powers. To understand the scope of this matter, we have to look past the official narratives. We will dismantle the state's case using a forensic audit. First, hard mathematics. Next, acoustic biometrics. Finally, their own tracking logs. When the full weight of the state apparatus targets a highly vulnerable individual, bureaucracy often masks intent. Only objective mathematical proof can expose the mechanics of the operation. The timeline of the federal prosecution presents a physical impossibility. The Crown alleges that Simpson committed domestic offenses between June and July of 2025, yet border movement records prove he was physically offshore in Southeast Asia during that entire period. To bring him back into the jurisdiction, Services Australia unlawfully cancelled Simpson's disability support pension. This severed his only source of income, financially starving him into an immediate, forced return to Australia. This timeline tracks the sequence of events across a specific 144-hour window. It maps the DSP cancellation, the forced return, the physical arrest, and finally the manual reinstatement of his pension exactly 24 hours after he was detained. The data shows a perfect statistical correlation. The probability of 7 independent agencies executing these highly specific hostile actions by coincidence is 10 to the negative 14th power. That is a decimal point followed by 14 zeros. When he landed in Sydney, the trap closed. Australian Border Force operatives, identifying themselves in audio recordings as Team 7, ambushed Simpson at the airport. Under the immediate threat of imprisonment, they coerced him into handing over his device passcode. Administrative welfare systems were fused with counterterrorism policing to execute a dragnet that crossed international borders. Following his arrest, Simpson was held for nearly 6 hours without water or his prescribed medication. During this time, police specifically seized his therapeutic suicide prevention tools, including his vinyl cutter and shirt press. During the interrogation, the legal protections required for a person with severe autism were abandoned. A corrupted independent third person, tasked with protecting his rights, instead fed him a cover story on a hot microphone, while detectives forced statements from him in a state of terror. This waveform chart compares Simpson's speech during the interrogation against a standard baseline. It measures vowel space area, the acoustic distance between core vowel sounds. Simpson severely compressed his vowel space, providing a validated biometric marker of clinical psychomotor retardation. This biometric data prove that at the time of questioning, Simpson was biologically incapable of forming criminal intent or voluntarily waiving his rights. Services Australia claimed to have lost pages 32 through 34 of Simpson's official psychiatric report. These specific pages contained his critical 30-point medical impairment rating. The mathematical probability of randomly losing 3 sequential exculpatory pages from a secure digital database is less than 0.0001. The record of the federal interrogation shows further evidence of manipulation: 21 missing minutes, bit-for-bit triplicate audio loops, and digital workstation editing files. By manipulating the interrogation record and his clinical history, the state systematically dismantled the evidence of Simpson's incapacity. Simpson has launched a legal counteroffensive across the Supreme Court, VCAT, and the Administrative Review Tribunal. These proceedings reveal deep contradictions in the Crown's narrative. While prosecutors argued Simpson was a dangerous flight risk, the police's own internal situation reports prove he returned voluntarily and posed nil threats. This institutional resistance is recorded within the judiciary itself. At the magistrate's court, a judge was caught on a hot microphone attempting to bypass the statutory requirement for written reasons, while a prosecutor deployed a disability slur during the hearing. These exact tactics mirror a prior case.
In the Carrick decision, a judge permanently stayed terrorism charges against a 13-year-old autistic boy, ruling that the Joint Counterterrorism Team had actively entrapped him. The team that targeted that child is the exact same Joint Counterterrorism Team prosecuting Simpson. This operation is an adult escalation of the exact same abusive entrapment tactics the courts have previously condemned. When the acoustic biometrics are analyzed, the spoliation math is calculated, and internal state documents exposed, the prosecution is revealed as a legal nullity.
Old choice. A box tick quota, Celtic filler on the punchline that bites back harder than a drop bear thriller. Reaching for the truth, but the outrage brigade knocks on, proving it daily. It's all fucking jokes when the Irish stops. One drop of blood, nah, can't. We get the whole potato flood. Whole potato flood when the Irish stops. Oi, when the heritage cop drop, yeah. We comedian Irish, Aussie pal as chalk. So what the fuck can't we? What the fuck can't we talk? Is all it is a joke. Not to be clipped out of context, bro. A joke. Laugh or fuck off, go when the Irish stops, bang. Keep it rolling.